Hello! With Modern Horizons 2 spoilers being in full swing, even though the set has not been entirely released, I decided to record a video where I talk about the most exciting and most interesting cards in the set. There is still some cards to be spoiled. We have seen roughly 80–90% of the set, and given the extraordinarily low amount of time between the full set spoiler and the Magic Online release, I wanted to record this video a little bit earlier, so it's possible we're going to see some other insane cards, but for the most part, most of the set is already known. Alright, so to kick things off, I wanted to mention a few meaningful reprints that are going to enter this format. First of them is going to be, obviously, Counterspell. A spell that doesn't really need introduction to many. Blue-blue counter-target spell. It's going to replace the somewhat weak soft permission that control decks were playing in Modern for years, and I'm talking about mostly Mana Leak in this scenario. As long as you're playing 2 or 3 colors in your blue control deck, blue-blue should be not much of a problem. You are already incentivized to go to play Archmage's Charm, Cryptic Command in the past, although we'll see with that in the future. One note about Counterspell's mana cost might be that, given the fact that you might actually require a lot of blue mana in the late turns, with Counterspell being your default Counterspell, Filter Lands could possibly go a little bit up in value in your control deck's mana bases. The other reprint that is worth mentioning is Sanctum Prelate. Being a free mana creature that can lock out an entire mana value of spells from being cast, it is very possible that it can make some waves in the format. If we look at the current builds of the top deck of Modern, blue-red prowess, it is in fact actually very handily stopped by Sanctum Prelate. It actually cannot really win the game with Sanctum Prelate on the battlefield. It is a card that is fairly easy to account for, but it might be a card that will need to be accounted for, and that alone means that it can be fairly impactful in the format. On top of that, it's both a free mana creature for a collected company and a human for the human stack, so there is a little bit of synergy there. The last reprint I would like to talk about is Shotless Agent. It is just a simple creature of Cascade, but I believe that has some repercussions for the format. Just being a Cascade card for free mana is fairly powerful. We have all seen the Cascade decks, Living End, or like previously in Kaldheim, we had the Cascade into Tibalt decks. Being a blue-green free mana Cascade card means that now you can have 2 good, cheap Cascaders in your Timur deck if you play it alongside Violent Outburst, which is a pretty nice upside. On top of that, there is also just the possibility of playing it as a value card, especially with Counterspell entering the format. Cascade is a mechanic deck that naturally matches up very well against counter magic, therefore it might be useful in this context. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the original prints, the new cards, the actual new cards. First, let's talk about Subtlety and the entire Pitch Evoke cycle. I will choose Subtlety as the poster child of this cycle, as I believe it is the most powerful out of the entire cycle. Re-interaction is always very strong in the game of Magic the Gathering, and Subtlety, being essentially an Essence Scatter effect, supplements Force of Negation as another free counterspell in blue control-ish decks very nicely. A huge part of why I like the Evoke Pitch creatures so much, though, is the fact that while they are potentially free interaction, where you can 1-for-2 yourself to not fall behind on tempo and not be killed with cards in hand, you can just hardcast them later in the game. Subtlety for 4 mana lets you gain a free flyer, which is a solid body, and on top of that you also still counter your opponent's creature spell or planeswalker spell. Effectively, that is a blowout of Cryptic Command proportions, I would say, so having that as the backside of your very powerful pitch early game spell is a very nice thing. On top of that, the reason why I like Subtlety the most is the fact that it's blue. Being blue and pitching blue cards means that it's much easier to fit into a deck. Solitude has a very strong effect, arguably even a stronger one. It is less easy to hardcast, which is a big downside in my eyes. And on top of that, having a deck that easily supports pitching a white card can be a difficult task. Grief is one that I find fairly powerful too, although I believe it's going to be a little bit hard to use it fairly. You don't really want 2-for-1 yourself to cast a Thoughtseize. So the way I imagine Grief being played in Modern is mostly alongside Ephemerate or Malakir Rebirth type effects, where you can combine the two cards to get a little bit of a blowout early in the game. Keep in mind that as of recording of this video, I do not know the effects of the last red member of the cycle. It might end up being even better than Subtlety. We'll see. Next card is going to be a little bit hard to pronounce, so bear with me. Asmoranommardikada isti na kuldakar. And Underworld Cookbook, which is a card that goes together with Asmora. Despite the meme long name, those cards might actually be real contenders in the upcoming Modern metagame, I think. Ever since Faithless Looting left the Modern format, there was a fairly large hole for discard outlets. It was not very easy to discard cards, it was not very easy to put stuff into your graveyard and then benefit from that, and Underworld Cookbook actually seems like a fairly reasonable way to do this for just 1 mana. So I think that Underworld Cookbook and Asmor have a decent chance of reviving an archetype that was killed with the ban of the Faithless Looting. All one style decks. The upsides are numerous. With a Street Wraith you can cast Asmor on turn 1 and you have a decent threat. With Cookbook and Asmor fetching the Cookbook, you actually have a much greater access to a discard outlet, so you're actually going to have one in your hand pretty reliably. On top of that, Asmor plus the Cookbook lets you skimp on actual removal spells in your deck. Asmor herself has a deal 6 ability which should clear many creatures. Modern Horizons 2 also brings a few new Madness cards. Kitchen Imp and Blazing Rootwalla both look interesting to me and potentially fairly playable in an Asmor deck. Given all of those factors, I believe that Asmor can enable some kind of a Madness and or graveyard based aggressive strategy to emerge in Modern. The next card that interests me is well, so far being translated to Academy Manufacturer. The English version hasn't been spoiled yet, so we don't know for sure. A 3 mana 1/3 artifact assembly worker. Whenever you create a treasure, clue or food, create all 3 of those tokens instead. Now, I would put Academy Manufacturer as a card that interests me a lot, but it is very likely that's not actually going to be a constructed all-star. That being said, it could enable some very nice combo decks, so I'm going to be trying a lot. The main thing that entices me is that Academy Manufacturer seems to enable you to create a lot of game objects. There is plenty of cheap ways to get a treasure, clue or food. There is Gilded Goose, there is Witch's Oven Cauldron familiar combination if you are willing to play that in Modern. There is Thraben Inspector for just 1 mana again. There is previously mentioned Underworld Cookbook. There is the new card Lonis, Cryptozoologist, and also there is a new Modern Horizons 2 spell, Strike It Rich. Now, all of those cards for a cheap cost create a game object. With Academy Manufacturer, you get to create 3 game objects instead of just 1. Now, notice how I am using the word game object. I am actually mostly interested in using those tokens to perform actions with different cards rather than just crack the clues for cards and foods for life. There's actually a plenitude of ways in which you can get paid off for having plenty of artifacts on the battlefield. You could, for example, use Ursa, Lord High Artificer, produce a lot of mana, and cast, for example, Upheaval, a new reprint that is going to leave you with something and your opponent with nothing, from which you're going to be able to win easily. You could use a lot of artifact tokens to sacrifice them to Time Sieve every turn and just take infinite turns. You could also go pretty easily with Clock of Omens. One example of an infinite combo is going to be Cauldron Familiar, Witch's Oven, Clock of Omens, Academy Manufacturer. While it might sound silly to use a 4-card combo, each subsequent combo piece of this loop should help you out a little bit and improve your position, so it is not fully that you're investing full cards into the combo itself. The way it works, Clock of Omens lets you tap your newly acquired tokens from Academy Manufacturer, untap your Witch's Oven, return your Cauldron Familiar, create a new food, make a lot of new objects, untap your oven, sacrifice your card again, therefore draining your opponent from their life points. The full extent as to how exactly can you build with Academy Manufacturer is yet to be understood by me, and it's gonna be a nice journey, and many tokens are going to be created along the way. I'm hoping this is going to be strong. It is certainly very exciting. The last package of cards that I find very interesting to think about is going to be Unmarked Grave and Persist. As the English version hasn't been spoiled yet, let me read out Persist to you. 1 black sorcery. Target a non-legendary creature card in your graveyard. Return it to the battlefield with a -1/-1 counter on it. When thinking about this card, I envision two versions of Reanimator that I could see being played in Modern. First of them would be a probably white-black based deck built mostly on Persist and redundancy from Priest of Fell Rites. It will be a deck trying to use as many interaction spells as possible, so mostly being a white-black sewer deck with that Reanimator combo on top of that. Traditionally, the legendary creatures were typically the most effective ones to be brought back with reanimation spells in older formats. So while we won't have anything on the level of Griselbrand, most likely, we have something to work with. With Unmarked Grave, we can actually play a little bit of a toolbox of reanimation targets for different situations. Tidespout Tyrant, Ashen Rider, Sundering Titan, Terrasodon, those are pretty good at being able to interact with your opponent, being able to blow their lands. Most decks do not come back from having their mana base destroyed. And there's also some more general targets that would be good in more specific situations or against decks that can't really kill them. Those are two new cards. Serra's Emissary and Archon of Cruelty are both seemingly designed to be reanimation targets for a constructed deck. I think I like them both a decent amount, although certainly their power level is not off the charts and they can definitely be defeated by your opponent doing a powerful thing. For the most part, it is very possible that such a Reanimator shell just is not going to have enough power to compete. The thing that it's going to do is going to be somewhat easy to hate out while not being in the end all that powerful. The other way to play Persist would be to use Persist as a redundancy for Footsteps of the Goryo alongside Protean Hulk. If you're able to reanimate and then sacrifice your Protean Hulk, you actually get to fetch an infinite combo from your deck pretty easily and kill your opponent. One example of such a combo would be to fetch a Karmic Guide and a Viscera Seer with the first trigger, return your Protean Hulk from your graveyard again, sacrifice it to your Viscera Seer again, and search for Mikaeos the Unhallowed and Walking Ballista in your deck. That allows you to ping your opponent for infinite damages. In Protean Hulk reanimation, Unmarked Grave seems like actually the more important card, the more effective card, letting you search for your Hulk and put it straight into your graveyard. Persist is the weaker reanimation spell in this situation, as Footsteps of the Goryo has the huge upside of automatically sacrificing your Protean Hulk at the end of turn, which is something that you want to do anyways. All that being said, I think it's going to be fairly interesting and fairly fun to explore reanimation possibilities in Modern now. We've only really had Goryo's Vengeance, Griselbrand decks in Modern previously. Since the banning of looting, we couldn't have done even that, realistically. Given that with Modern Horizons we get the Unmarked Grave and some extra discard outlets, as the already multiple times mentioned Underworld Cookbook, Bone Shards, and a few others, I think there might be some new fun decks that pop up. Alright, those were the cards that interested me the most from Modern Horizons 2 so far, although that being said, there is a lot of modern playable cards in this expansion, and I am waiting eagerly to start building decks and start playing with new cards. With the exception of maybe Subtlety and Counterspell and the rest of the Evoke pitch cycle, it seems like a lot of the cards are trying to put some extra synergistic power into archetypes that were lacking something since the Faithless Looting ban or maybe the Mox Opal ban. I think that's a very nice approach that they've taken this time. There's also a lot of cards that is very interesting, but I haven't touched them as I didn't have time to cover everything in detail. I'm going to do my usual set review the day of the full spoiler being available on twitch.tv/canister_mtg as it is usual. And with all being said, I invite you wholeheartedly to subscribe to my YouTube channel, like this video, leave a comment, etc. Peace.